We're going to start by recording this. So this is Rod Howe. I'm an Assistant Director for Cornell Cooperative Extension and Executive Director of CARDI, which is the Community and Regional Development Institute. This event is also sponsored by the Department of City and Regional Planning. In short, this is a summary of a conference that we did back in March. We want to continue the discussion that we started back then, and we're pleased to have with us today Mildred Warner with the Department of City and Regional Planning, Clint McCannis, who's also with CRP, Robin Blakely Armitage, who's with CARDI, and Mac Cook, who's with the City of Portland.
While we're pulling up the PowerPoint, this is Mildred Warner, and I'll start talking just to, no, wait.
And really the purpose of today is to, as I said before, continue the dialogue. We know that municipalities are experiencing fiscal stress, and we hope to have folks share information about creative strategies and policy considerations in this period of fiscal stress. You'll hear us reference 4 cities, but this dialogue really goes beyond these 4 cities. It really refers to all municipalities in New York State in terms of how they can meet their basic needs of the residents and work toward vibrant places to live, work, and play. We think that there are a set of groups that need to come together to share information and data, and we will actually refer to that toward the end of the webinar about how some groups are doing just that. I'm going to turn this over to Mildred Warner, who will set the stage.
Don't we want to put this on full screen so that they are only seeing the PowerPoint and not all of that?
We want to see that.
Okay. All right, thank you all very much. It's a pleasure for me to be able to speak with you today at this conference on creative responses to fiscal stress. And what I've been asked to do here is to set the context. And I wanted to start, the return button doesn't move it forward. Okay. I wanted to start by talking about the state context. Now, we all know that Cuomo's original proposal back several years ago was to do 3 things: a tax cap for governments and school districts, a property tax freeze, a circuit breaker for homeowners, and mandate relief. And it's pretty clear that we need all 3 of these reforms to get a comprehensive relief program. The tax cap without the other reforms provides no real relief to taxpayers. It just starves the cities and citizens of services. We've done an analysis here at Cornell and determined that if the tax cap had been put in place back in 2000, expenditures today would be 23% less than what they currently are. It's hard to imagine how we could maintain the level of services that our citizens are used to with budgets that are 23% less. In other words, the tax cap is probably not a reasonable way to maintain services and reduce costs. Also, it doesn't address the problem of the need for a tax circuit breaker for middle-class and lower-income households. That's what the tax circuit breaker was supposed to do, but when it came in place with the legislation this year, it came along with strings attached for requiring sharing arrangements, and that these sharing arrangements would generate a significant amount of savings. And here raises a second concern. Sharing arrangements are great, and we've been doing them in New York State for a long time, and I'll actually be presenting survey work that we did last year with all the local government associations and school districts in the state on sharing. But what we're finding is that the savings are not as large as the legislation seems to require. And finally, of course, mandate relief is still needed, and for some reason that's not on the table. What about you? Okay. So I just wanted to give you a couple of quick pictures. When we did our day-long seminar back in March, we profiled 4 cities: Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Utica. And I thought it might be useful to replay some of the slides from those 4 cities because I don't think they're all that different than most local governments or school districts would be. And what you'll see is that when you look at total city expenditures across the last 12 years, you'll notice that the lines are basically flat. These are in constant dollars, so we've taken account of inflation. And so in real terms, city expenditures have been basically flat. So local governments are controlling their expenditures. When we look at property tax caps, property taxes also in real terms, you'll notice a very interesting thing that property taxes were flat or falling even before the tax cap. So it appears that y'all are doing your jobs pretty well. The question is, what's happened to mandate relief? Now, what I did here is I took data from the U.S. Census of Government Finance, and the most recent data on that is from 2007, and I compared New York State's level of decentralization of fiscal responsibility to the local level. I compared it to all of our border states, and what you'll notice is that New York State has the highest level of decentralizing responsibility back to the local level. And this is a primary driver of high local property taxes in New York State. Also, from the state, you'll notice that state aid has fallen in real terms since the recession. So whereas the recession took about a 2-year lag before it really hit local governments because of ARRA funding from the feds and because the declines in the housing market have a lag delay before they hit you in property taxes, at the time when the recession really began to hit local governments, which was 2009, is the precise time when state aid started to drop. So, what's the local government response? Well, we see three responses. One is to hollow out, cut services, lay off workers. The second is to ride the wave. So you all are all great surfers, and you figure out how you can ride this wave and try to get as much out of the challenge as you can, and shared services are the big reform. And even at the national level, I have here in the box on the right, the level of intermunicipal contracting, and this is measured by the International City-County Management Association. It covers all governments in the United States, and you'll see that intermunicipal contracting is now widespread and bigger than for-profit privatization. Why? Because it does save money, because it promotes regional collaboration and service delivery with your neighbors, and because it's actually now a pretty common thing. In privatization, you'll notice that there actually hasn't been an increase. There's been a slight decrease, but that decrease is very slight enough that we might just call privatization flat. And what's happening with privatization is that insourcing or reversing previous private contracts back to the public sector is now as common as outsourcing. So in that flat trend, there's actually a lot of dynamics going on as some local governments are looking to go out to market to see if they can save some money, and others have found that they didn't get the savings or the quality they wanted, and so they're coming back into public delivery. So this riding the wave we can think of as using the market and linking market with government in all sorts of creative ways that try to get you some cost savings and service efficiency. The third thing that local governments are doing is pushing back. Now, at the citizen level in the United States, it's pretty much a situation of acquiescence. Citizens are not paying that much attention. In Europe, they're hitting the streets and complaining about their loss of services under austerity. But in the U.S., we're a pretty quiet bunch, and we're pretty acquiescent, except for the Tea Party. And so in some sense, where we see the political protest in the U.S. is from citizens who aren't sure that they really want so many government services anymore, and a real questioning of the role of government. And that creates special problems for local governments because we provide the basic infrastructure services that ensure quality of life and a functioning economy. Where we see pushing back more interestingly in the U.S. is among local government leaders like yourselves, who are pursuing all sorts of new ways of service delivery. And I'm thinking of things like developer impact fees to fund public services, or the expansion of business improvement districts, which are inviting businesses to increase their taxes on themselves in order to increase services, or the use of land trust for foreclosed properties, which I believe Clint will talk about in his talk coming forward. But these are ways in which innovative new ways that local governments are providing services and encouraging their citizens to engage. Now, I promised you that I would be referencing the municipal survey that we did in 2003 with New York State Conference of Mayors, Association of Counties, Association of Towns, and the School Superintendents Association. And what you'll see here is that we had a really excellent response rate. Thank you all very much. And we are actually in a position to talk about the level of shared services found in New York State now at a time when the issue of shared services has become even more important because it's part of a new legislative rule that we all have to abide by. What I thought you'd be interested in is we asked you what are your responses to fiscal stress, and you'll see that the two most common responses were, number one, to increase user fees, number two, to explore additional shared services, and the third, to personnel cost and reductions. What you'll notice down at the bottom, this hollowing out, the eliminating services, selling assets, or declaring bankruptcy, those are things that are at the bottom of your list. That's not where we want to go here in New York State. We're looking at ways to make the system work and to try to find some efficiencies. So with that, I want to turn our attention directly to the property tax freeze and the circuit breaker proposal because it relates directly to the issue of shared services. And what we find from the 2013 survey, that of the 29 services that we measured, the sharing rate across all of you was at about 27%. Public Works, Public Safety, Parks and Recreation showed the highest levels of sharing. This is no surprise. Our highway departments, our fire departments have been working together since, well, at least since World War II and probably before then. So that's long-standing sharing arrangements that we're all very comfortable with. But the other thing that we also measured is what was the goal you were trying to achieve with your sharing, and did you achieve it? And according to you all, the respondents to this survey, the municipal leaders from across the state, you said that cost savings were only one goal, and they were only achieved half the time. That your other goals for sharing services included service quality and regional coordination, not just cost savings. Now, it's not that we're not good at it and we don't know how to save cost. It's that even across the international studies that I've looked at, we find that cooperation is not primarily driven by cost savings and not always found. So what we're finding in New York State is not different from what we find in other countries. So what we did here is we took the 29 services, we put them into 5 categories: public works and transportation, administration and support, recreation and social services, public safety, and economic development and planning. And we averaged the responses that you gave us for whether you achieved cost savings, whether you achieved improved service quality, and whether you achieved improved regional coordination. And what you'll notice on this list is that cost savings is achieved about half the time, but the one service area where it seems like there's some more potential is in administrative and support services. So that's something that I think as an agenda going forward, we should be articulating what those administrative and support services were, because with the new proposal from the legislature, we need to find cost savings, and this is the area where they appear that they might be most likely to be found. In the next slide, what we did is we took the comptroller's budget data by individual service, and we compared municipalities that shared service delivery for that service with those that said they did not, and asked, are your expenditures lower if you share? And we controlled for population, density, and metropolitan status. And what we discovered is that roads and highways definitely have lower cost if you share, police and libraries the same. Solid waste, only when we did it on total expenditure. It didn't show up on per capita. And we also did a measure for all services together. But there are 2 services, interestingly, where if you share, the costs were actually higher. And this would relate to the quality issue, like elder services. If you're sharing with a neighbor to provide elder services, it's probably because you're now providing elder services that you didn't provide before. And so it's actually an improvement in service delivery. And this is back to this issue of regional coordination or service quality, not just cost savings being a goal. Now, if we look specifically at administrative and support services, I've collected here the ones that had the highest rates of reported cost savings being achieved. Tax assessment. One tax assessor for the whole county, a consistent form of tax assessment across the county. If you're a small county, that would probably cover you rather than having a whole bunch of tax assessors in each unit. So this has advantages both for equity across units and for cost savings. Energy production and purchase. This is a very volatile market. Those of you who are part of MEGA have seen the benefits of being part of a consortium for energy purchasing, or OCM BOCES does this for a whole group of governments in the sort of Syracuse upstate area. Supply purchasing, and you all know you can travel on state contracts. Health insurance consortiums, which I believe Matt Cook will mention a little bit later. Cortland joined with Tompkins County on a health insurance consortium. Liability insurance. And then the last one is information technology, an area of increasing cost expenditure for us, but one where some clear benefits of shared services are present. But I want to spend a few minutes talking about management. Sharing is not free, and sharing is not easy. It needs some kind of administrative and management structure to make it work out. And you know, when the state decided a bunch of decades ago that they wanted our school districts to share, they created a structure to facilitate sharing, and that's the BOCES, the Boards of Cooperative Education Services. I would argue that we need a similar type structure for municipalities. And in fact, you could even use the BOCES structure for some of these back office administrative and support services, because BOCES is allowed to do those sharing agreements with municipalities as what they call COSERs, cooperative service agreements. We also need the state to look at rules the state has created that limit sharing and service innovation. These include restrictions on service sharing between municipalities and fire departments. They include contract rules that promote leveling up of cost among the sharing districts. So if you're cooperating with another district that has higher labor costs, you're going to be forced up, not forced down in terms of where those costs go. And then there's liability and accounting concerns that are often listed as obstacles to service sharing, which need to be addressed. We also did a school survey, and in case we have any schools on the program today, I just wanted to show you what the data show on that. And again, here you see the really big importance of BOCES as an administrative unit to encourage sharing. 91% rates of sharing on payroll, 52% on health insurance, 77% on joint purchasing. And the areas where we see the largest sharing rates with municipalities are in tax collection and a school resource officer, which would often be someone in the police department. But there's some opportunities here to link between schools and local governments that I think we need to explore. So, in conclusion, we need new alternatives. And we clearly need a state-level partner. The state needs to re-centralize fiscal responsibility for services back up to the state level and bring the levels of decentralization in New York in line with the other states around us. That would go a long way to increasing local government competitiveness in our region. Secondly, the state needs to give local governments more flexibility in sharing services with other municipalities and districts, in co-production with citizens, and in collaboration with labor unions. I argue that we need to provide an administrative structure to facilitate sharing, like a BOCES for local government. But the fact remains that we do need regional approaches, because if we're going to build a 21st century local government, service quality and coordination are going to be key. And I'm ending this with a list of resources that are available on my website. I'm sure this PowerPoint will be put up afterwards. But these are some of the resources and issue briefs that we have on the survey and on the idea of BOCES as a possible administrative structure. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Clint McManus.
Before we do that, we are interspersing a few polls throughout the presentation. So I am going to open up the first poll. We know that not all of you are on that you're not with a municipality, but you all live in municipalities, so maybe you can answer this question: do you think your municipality shares services? In terms of the second question, if yes, what services? Just type those responses in the chat box. So if your municipality does share services, what has saved you the most money? I'll leave this poll open for just a couple of minutes. I think we're going to wait and save questions at the end, just because we're running behind just a little bit. So we want to get through all of the information. So I'll leave this open just for a minute. But Clint, I'm going to have you go ahead and start, and I might interrupt you when I close the. Well, let me see. Maybe enough people have responded. I think I said that at the end. Let me see if enough of you have responded. I think we'll go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like a number of municipalities are sharing services. And then in terms of whether folks have indicated, it's just finishing up here. So you can look in the chat box as we move forward to see if folks were able to identify which services may have saved them the most money. And we will also now move forward so that Clint can start his presentation. We are sharing this presentation on the CARTI website. We will provide a link to that at the very end of the presentation, so it will be a PDF version, but there are a number of links that we're sharing today, and in the PDF you'll be able to link to those resources. So Clint, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Clint McManus, and I'll be presenting some findings from research done by myself and some fellow grad students as well. This isn't just my research. And following Mildred's outline of the context for today's webinar, I want to highlight some specific examples of creative responses to fiscal stress by profiling 4 cities in upstate New York: Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Utica. And this is just to ground Mildred's presentation in some real examples. And I'm sure what I'm going to talk about many of you have also experienced in your own municipalities as well. While the examples of the creative responses are oftentimes unique in these 4 cities, they do have some things in common, which Mildred also touched on. The first is that where possible, these cities are cutting expenditures, and where possible, these cities are also increasing their revenues. And I want to emphasize that the where possible here, because as Mildred showed, municipalities are really constrained by a lot of these new state policies. And then finally, these cities are doing their best to make the right decisions that allow them to provide the best possible services for their residents. They want to remain solvent. So first, let's turn to revenues. These charts, they show key revenue sources for the 4 case study cities. And although it's easy to get discouraged by the red line, which shows the declining state aid, these graphs also say something else. If you look closely at some of the green lines, which indicate sales tax, and the blue lines, which show charges for services, you can see that some of the cities are already beginning to react to the pressure of state policies. This is most evident in Syracuse and Rochester. You can see increases in sales tax revenue and charges for services in those cases. And this is really recent, just in the past couple of years. Now, from a budgeting point of view, this makes a lot of sense. If you're constrained by property tax caps and state aid, where else are you going to turn but to sales tax and charges for services? So that brings us to the first revenue strategy, which is to boost sales tax. We found this to be really prevalent throughout the cities, and there's different examples of how this has worked. So we found a lot of examples of new commercial developments. For example, Utica is cleaning up Harbor Point, which is an old industrial site along Erie Canal, in order to make space for large commercial lots. And they also renovated their hockey auditorium in the hopes of attracting people to downtown businesses during games. Rochester is partnering with Monroe County in order to build Citygate, which is a mixed-use development that has Costco as the anchor store. Rochester is also completely renovating a downtown plaza to make way for mixed-use development. And Buffalo has indicated its theater district as a prime place for investment in order to increase business activity there. And it's not that these cities have tons of money to spend on these sorts of projects, it's that they're making an investment in order to increase sales tax in the few coming years and into the indefinite future. Or at least that's the plan. Oh, sorry. Go back up to 2 slides previously. They're also, to a lesser degree, these cities are investing in their small businesses. So the city of Rochester has supported a RIT initiative to convert an old historic building space into a new center for urban entrepreneurship. And this is encouraging small business growth among all populations in the city of Rochester, particularly center city, lower income populations. And then finally, there's also examples of sales tax agreements, particularly in Syracuse. In 2010, the city of Syracuse and Onondaga County signed the sales tax sharing agreement, which was extremely beneficial for the city, and in one single fiscal year raised sales tax revenues by more than 20%, from $61.4 million to $74.2 million. And I'd like to point out that this was not a zero-sum game. The city of Syracuse was able to make the case to Onondaga County that plenty of people work in the city of Syracuse but live in Onondaga County, and that the services provided by the city of Syracuse not only support its citizens but the citizens in the surrounding region as well. So this is going to maintain those services. Now, beyond tax strategies, these cities are also looking to other revenue sources. Rochester, for example, has employed innovative user fee structures that charge for snow plowing and street cleaning by parcel frontage. And when they did this, it only increased annual user fees by an average of $18 per household. So not significant to the individual, but very significant for the city. These cities are also engaging with anchor institutions like hospitals and universities in order to improve services. For example, Syracuse University and the city of Syracuse have partnered in order to renovate the streetscapes and to create open green spaces that connect Syracuse University to downtown Syracuse. I already mentioned the city of Rochester's partnership with RIT, and in Utica, the Mohawk Valley Community College is offering job trainings for a large percentage of refugee families within the city. Many cities are also working on building their grant capacity. This is something we find particularly prevalent in smaller municipalities. For example, Utica has contracted with a successful grant writer from Rome in order to not only boost the number of grants that they receive, but to maintain the ones that they currently have. And then finally, as Mildred alluded to in her presentation, a lot of these cities are turning to land trusts and land banking. Syracuse and Buffalo are 2 major examples of this. They've established organizations that are taking control of vacated land and demolishing dilapidated buildings. And it's not only addressing high rates of vacancy, but it's pulling tax delinquent properties back onto the tax rolls and making them productive again. So now let's turn to expenditures, which many of you may feel like is not as fun as revenues. I'm sure all of you are familiar with a range of unpopular budget cuts, and while each of these cities have had to make tough decisions on trimming expenditures, they're also attempting to save money in other ways. For one, again, as Mildred mentioned, service sharing has helped save some money, although that's not always the primary goal. Often the driver is to increase services or improve services. Rochester, for example, is sharing some facilities with its school district for soccer games, and Utica stores some of its salt in neighboring towns' salt granaries or salt silos. Cities are also exploring new public-private partnerships. Syracuse and Buffalo have really created strong partnerships with Say Yes to Education, which is providing charter schools within the city, and Buffalo also ceded control of its city park system to the Buffalo Olmsted Park Conservancy. In addition to this, some cities are exploring innovative service delivery. So this is where Rochester has really stepped in and provided some really unique ways of providing services. It's converted some of its trash trucks to also be snow plowing, or to also plow snow, so they can pick up the trash and plow snow at the same time. And it's also automated some of its trash trucks so that one person can drive instead of 2 people. And they've done this within the past few years as well. And so finally, these cities are attempting to renegotiate labor agreements, and this is, I suppose, one of the more tricky ones. But Utica and Rochester provide some examples. Utica saved money by restructuring the police and fire hierarchy, and it's really saved some of their money in terms of payroll. And they've also revisited healthcare contracts. Rochester also revisited healthcare contracts, and they came up with an agreement that would limit the city's annual increase of healthcare contribution. It would be capped at a certain %, and they established a trust fund in order to cover the other increasing costs. And so the point of all this is not to give you ideas about what you should do in your own community or what other people are doing that you're not doing. In fact, you've probably heard of many of these examples before, but it's just to show that local governments are places of innovation, and they always have been places of innovation. And in spite of current state and federal trends, these 4 cities have shown that innovation is possible in the face of fiscal stress. There are likely hundreds of more examples from towns, villages, and counties as well. But I hope that this presentation puts a positive spin on a sometimes dreary subject matter, and that you'll walk away with some food for thought.
Thank you, Clint. And it's time for, again, going back to Clint's last point here, feel free to type in innovative strategies in the chat box. But let me open up another chat box, another poll. And again, you might be answering from the perspective that you're a member of a municipality, not as an elected official. Let's see. You may have to I'm going to try to open this up, but if I'm not successful, you can type in your answers in the chat box. So let me try again. So go ahead and, for some reason it's not opening up the poll, so you can just type in the chat box the answer to this in terms of what % of your property tax base is tax exempt and whether you charge user fees. We're going to move on to the next segment of the presentation, which is Robin Blakely Armitage, who will cover material related to resources and data and tools for you to consider.
All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. So, yes, as Rod indicated, I will point you to some tools and resources, but that will be at the end of the presentation. I don't think we'll have a lot of time to actually go visit the sites that I'd hoped to, but as he mentioned a while ago, this PowerPoint will be available in PDF, so all the links to the resources will be also available to you, so I do encourage you to visit some of these sites. So today I'm going to talk about using demographics in fiscal planning. How do I advance? Okay. So for many of you, demography may be like tofu. It may be hard to stomach on its own, But I'm here to convince you that it has a lot to contribute, particularly when mixed with other things. And Warren Brown is participating on this line, and I want to say thank you, Warren. You said this quote, or I'm paraphrasing you actually, just a couple days ago, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. But while demography is like tofu, it is not destiny. Demographic changes can propel communities upward or downward, and it can pose challenges for communities, but it also can enhance opportunities. And sometimes it's not as clear-cut which is which. And the impacts of population changes are not automatic. They're mediated by social structure and also the state, national, and international environments in which they're embedded. So today we really want to focus, though, on having good data, research, and other information to help you plan for the future. So we're talking about demographics or demography. In your communities, in your municipalities, it's pretty basic to start. I mean, obviously we want to know how many people, who, and where are they. So some basic demographic trends that you should be paying attention to is obviously population change. Is it increasing, or is it decreasing? But even if your community's population is stable over time, it's highly unlikely that the composition of that population is stable. There's very likely to be changes in the age structure, in your poverty rates, income levels, unemployment, the educational attainment levels, and many, many other characteristics. And these characteristics are important to pay attention to in terms of fiscal planning, where you're making your investments, where you need to be funding more, where you might be able to cut, et cetera, et cetera. What are your points of stress going to be in terms of the people in your community? I'm just going to fly through a few charts just as examples of things. Again, I'm pulling data from our March conference, which of course focused on the 4 cities, but the points that I'm making are going to be true for pretty much any community in New York State. When you're looking at population change over time, it's very important to provide some context. So whether your population is increasing or decreasing, look at that, look at those rates, look at those levels compared to your neighbors, compared to the state as a whole. That's going to provide you a lot more information than just looking at yourself in isolation. Obviously, population change is not equally distributed across space. We look at this map of New York State that looks at change in population between the 2000 and 2010 censuses. We see that those counties in green grew and those counties in purple decreased in their population. There's some clustering, but there's still some wide-ranging change across space. If we were to look into any one of these counties, even within counties, population change varies across space. So, for example, in Erie County as a whole declined by over 3%, but Buffalo, the city, declined by over 10% in the 12-year period. In Monroe County actually increased a little bit, but Rochester decreased. So that's, again, the importance of contextualizing and comparing the trends and patterns in your municipality to those around you. Another key trend and pattern to look at is migration, and that is the movement of people into and out of a geographic area. Migration is also specific of certain ages, and in terms of workforce development and a whole host of other issues, looking at age-specific migration rates is very important. And upstate communities specifically have been losing a net effect of a loss of young adults since the 1960s. And I've provided the link on several of these charts of where you can go to find data for your own communities or counties. Also, we talked about age structure. Even if your population is stable, the age structure is likely to be changing. In New York State, the median age increased by almost 2 years since 2000, and in upstate, it's increasing at a more rapid rate. So for many of your communities, again, even if your population is stable or declining, it may be that your elderly population is actually increasing, and so you know in terms of service provision and a whole host of other issues that this sets up some challenges and potentially some opportunities too. These are age pyramids that can be found at the Program on Applied Demographics. They have for each county, they have age-specific, they have age pyramids, population pyramids by age that are actually projections out as well, out to the year 2030. Another characteristic to look at, of course, is race and ethnicity. Hispanics are now the largest race and ethnic group in New York State. And in upstate, while African Americans still outnumber Hispanics, the rate of growth for the Hispanic Latino population exceeds that for African Americans. And in fact, as this bullet says, the vast majority of upstate counties experienced Hispanic population growth between the last censuses. And for many smaller upstate communities, they would have, if you removed the positive impact of Hispanic in migration, they would have suffered population declines or more severe population declines. So there has been some more attention paid to what opportunities this can actually pose for some communities who are able to stem the population losses through the increase in Latino in-migration. Obviously, educational attainment and the attainment levels of your residents has a huge impact on your human capital levels at the local level. We look across these cities. We have a range of no high school degrees, and the percent of the population with bachelor's degrees or higher. And this, of course, will vary in your community. Poverty has been increasing in the last few years, last couple of decades actually. It's very important to look at the various measures of poverty. For those of you that have universities, community colleges, as other higher education institutions, you will likely have a higher rate of individual poverty levels, people below the poverty line, and that's because students will be taken into account in those numbers. They may or may not truly be poor, but it's oftentimes looking at family or household level poverty rates will give you a clear indication of the true poverty rates. Poverty rates also vary by age group, and this is a particularly shocking graph, and you will want to know what it is in your community if you don't already. While elderly poverty rates hover around the 10 to 16% rate among these examples, the child poverty rate, particularly in the 4 cities that we profiled in the conference, were upwards of 50%. And so this is shocking, it's catastrophic, and it does not bode well for the future in terms of, in terms of a lot of different processes. Poverty also varies by race and ethnicity, with Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino rates being much higher than white. Poverty also varies by location. The residential segregation patterns of the past may be cause and consequence of other processes, and they may have impacted the concentration of poverty in these central city areas. So understanding how these demographic patterns play out spatially or across space in your communities is also very important. So demography is important in fiscal planning. I hope I'm convincing you, if you haven't already been convinced, that accessing user-friendly data tools to explore your community's profile is very important. You need to identify trends and patterns in your community's population size as well as composition. The composition is really the key there. And understanding these population dynamics may help inform decisions around the programs, budgets, investments, and other strategies that you'll be looking at currently and as you move forward. I don't really have much time left, but I will let you know it's in the rest of my presentation so that once it's posted, you can go back. I have included links to some very good data tools and sources. The Cornell Program on Applied Demographics, which is the top one here. If you go to their main website and focus on the left-hand tab, there's a lot of data on New York State. Specifically, the second link is to their New York State county profiles, and the third link is to profiles that they've put together for cities, towns, and villages, and I think you'll find those very, very helpful. Below is the Headwaters Socioeconomic Toolkit. When I do trainings for accessing and interpreting demographic data, we usually run that training in a computer lab, so each of the participants gets to sit at their own computer and have an opportunity to play with this this tool. Essentially, as long as you have Excel on your computer, you can, this is a free download that you can access from this website that just sits on your Excel program as an add-in, and it allows you to access demographic data and a whole host of other data sets from across the country, actually, too, down to the place level. It's constantly being updated. It's very, very user-friendly, and I have included step-by-step directions in the subsequent slides. And then, of course, the U.S. Census Bureau is really where most of this data comes from, but we have heard from many people that sometimes the U.S. Census Bureau is a little bit hard to navigate, so I encourage you to check out these other tools first. And here's just sort of a laundry list of other useful data sources that you might want to check out at your leisure, including the Fiscal Stress Monitoring System from the Office of the New York State Comptroller. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And I am going to, again, Robin put some slides in here purposely so when you went to the PDF version you would have them. We knew we were not going to run through them today. We're not going to run through the poll 3, but I just want you to look at what we do want you to think about. Again, it gets back to revenue sources for municipalities. But I am going to turn it over to Matt Cook, who is the city administrator for Cortland, New York. He's the one in the room, one of the presenters, who has to figure out how you take this material and make some decisions about it. So thank you very much for being with us.
It's an honor to be here, and thank you folks on the call. I just want to spend maybe 30 seconds describing the city of Cortland so that you can put my comments in some type of context. Cortland, if you do not know where it's at or not familiar with it, is a central New York city. We're located about 30 miles south of Syracuse, 30 miles north of Binghamton. Our population is around 19,271 people today, plugging that little demographics there, of which 7,000 are SUNY Cortland attendees. We do have a high poverty rate. 54% of our children inside our city who are going to school are on free and reduced lunch. Our poverty rate officially is 23.6, but as Robin pointed out, that also includes the 7,000 student base. Our general fund is slightly less than $19 million, and we provide the basic core services of police, fire, DPW, and recreation. With that said, I'd like to move on to the next slide if I could and just talk a little bit about what I hope to be able to get through in my allotted time. The one thing I am going to say is that the concept of shared services, the term of shared services, is though it's in quite vogue these days, it is simply not a new concept. I agree with an earlier comment that we've been sharing services well back many, many years. I've been in this business for 30 years, and they were sharing services when I got involved. There is, and I'm going to say this, and it may be debatable, but the low-hanging fruit on the tree is simply not there anymore. I would also like to say that I do not think that the middle of the tree has much fruit left when it comes to pick on shared services. There may be some fruit on the high limbs of the tree, but I want to talk a little bit about why we might not be able to get there. And I'm going to call them roadblocks. One of them is that our budgets are simply so tight right now that the available resources to research a new model is simply not there. Many of us rely on money for new thoughts by petitioning under the local government efficiency grants. That's part of what's called the consolidated funding process, and that is competitive now. But there is money out there. I'm going to speak for myself, my city, is that I am short on capital if I wanted to finance the new model. I hear many people talk about the return on investment. Well, a return on investment assumes that you have money to invest. It's difficult for cities right now to find that extra dollars to change the model and move on shared services. It's difficult for me to build a new building if I want to share services with my adjoining town. It's difficult for me if I want to talk about shared plowing routes to uniform the fleet. The next thing that's out there that maybe prevents us from climbing up on the high limbs is the state law, the general municipal law. I have found it over the years to be more preventive than permissive. I would not one of those people that says it totally has to be scratched, because over my life there is wisdom in the code, there is wisdom in the New York law, and at times it's saved me from the pitfalls of my own ambition. But it does need, as part of a policy consideration that Mildred talked about, maybe a relook at what are the state laws and do they promote or do they inhibit shared services. I think one of the other reasons why we can't climb to the big ladder is what I call change thresholds. It's the ability of anybody to adapt to something new. And you encounter that, and I think we all have encountered that, and we're internally, between our staffs and our department heads, the silos that we were told about, that people think we have, they're there. They may not be made out of concrete, but there's something there. Electric leaders, it's very difficult to change the model, and they may be and move against the political establishment. But one of the strongest resistance groups to shared services is in our community and our citizens. And where I point out on that is a little information which I received from NICOM this past week. And these are not my research. These are the researches of our general counsel for NICOM, Wade Fraternal, who did something very, very, very unique. He went back and looked at all the village dissolutions since 1921. And there has been 47 since 1921. There's been 11 since the 2008 recession. So village dissolutions have not dramatically increased in the last several years in response to the recession. But more importantly, as many of you know, that in 2009, the governor passed the New York Government Reorganization and Citizen Empower Act. It was designed to put the power to dissolve into the citizens. Well, since that time, and I found this interesting, and it goes to me as evidence that the community is a large source of resistance to change, is that under the municipal law that allows for reorganization on a citizen's referendum, is that 29 petitions have been filed for village dissolutions. 22 of those have been voted down by the electorate. One of those petitions was held invalid, and there are 2 still votes to go. So out of the 29 petitions that have been filed under this act that came effective in 2010, there has been only 4 dissolutions of villages. That indicates to me, once again, that the citizens may be one of the largest blockages toward meaningful change in reorganization and sharing of services. So where do we go next? If we can't get to the top of the tree because the top of the tree has these bars, I think the next avenue is that you look at your budget. Where can you mine savings out of your budget? And I'm going to pull up an example in just a minute about health insurance. I'm also going to pull out another example because there is opportunity in this phraseology that personally I'm getting a little tired of, doing more with less. And there's a concept out there called reverse outsourcing. And I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to plug Robin's program. The value of demographics, I'm only going to spend, since if you're not doing it, incorporate it into your presentations, into your thought patterns, and the way you look at things. I'm late at coming this in my life. I wish I had met Robin many years ago, and I would be a much wiser person for it. But putting demographics into your discussion, at least for me, has raised the value and the contents of my discussion. So heed her advice. If you don't listen to me, but listen to Robin. I want to move on to health insurance, if I could, a little bit with the next slide. This slide is rather recent. I pulled it from the Pew Charitable Trust, which does a great deal of research on municipal pensions and municipal health care. And this is not going to come to surprise of anybody, any of the practitioners out there in the cities. Our health care costs have escalated. Okay? And your personal one, or your cities, or your villages, your school districts may vary, but I think it's representative that health care does still present to us a great deal of opportunity to reduce our costs through sharing. If I can go to the next slide. Healthcare, there is a blockage in healthcare to make meaningful reform. And I think we're all going to find it in our labor agreements in New York. Because I would venture to say that out there that almost every labor agreement, regardless of it be police, DPW, fire, regardless of the bargaining unit, will have a phraseology in there that reads something like this: the employer shall maintain the same or substantially equivalent health insurance. That has been in there, and has been in there for many, many years, because at one point in time, it was very easy to bargain with health insurance. It cost almost nothing. I'm going to date myself, but my family policy when I came into government in the late 70s was $72 a month. It has slightly increased over the years. But why do we have to re-challenge that? And how can we challenge that? And why does that have to be a cooperative movement with our labor unions? Okay. And the reason I look at it, being somewhat of a being a practical type person, is that if our insurance policies, if the cost is going to increase 12%, and that's not an out-of-line number, the cost of any premium that we're offering is going to double in the next 8 years. So whatever we're paying now will double in 8 years. And that's not factoring in the Cadillac tax that most municipal plans will be subject to when that comes into effect in 2018. Okay. Let's take a look at that. With the property capped at maybe 2%, we all know it's a little lower than that because it's actually the CPI, but let us assume that in the long range, 2% is what we're going to be able to raise our property tax. In order to double our revenue, to keep up with the doubling cost of health insurance, our revenue based on 2% will double in 35 years. Health insurance is going to double in 8. The ability to pay for that, the city's portion of it, the municipal portion of that, will double in 35 years. But let's take a look at the employer or the employee and why this clause in their union contracts might not be in their best interest. If the new norm in wage increases is 1%, that seems low, but in the reality is that the labor contracts that have been being negotiated in the last 2 or 3 years since the tax cap, 1% is a common number. Well, if my personal wage is going to increase by 1% a year, it will double in 70. It's just a mathematical function. My health insurance is going to double in 8. My wages to pay for that, my share of it, is going to double in 70 years. The equation needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed cooperatively between management and labor. But what does that really mean to the employee? Well, in Cortland, the mean average value of a house is around $92,000. So I'm going to say my average employer or average employee buys a $100,000 house in the village. Right now, at 4% on a 30-year fix, his mortgage is $480 a month. Okay. If the average contribution is 15% of the employee, his family coverage, okay, his portion of the family coverage in year 10 from today, will be $515. Health insurance is rising and will be more than a mortgage. That's dramatically different than it was 30 years ago. But what I'm trying to point out is that the employees, the unions, okay, we have to be more progressive on how we negotiate insurance and health insurance and what health insurance means. Are there some things that labor and management can do? And I'll go to the next slide, and it's already up. Is that we have to have cooperative plan design. We have to be able to begin to offer our employees inside the collective bargaining agreement multi-plan structure. We have to put in place employee choice. I think we're going to have to begin to have different plans at different price points to make sure it's affordable. Okay. The thought that a police who is generally on the higher end of the income spectrum in a municipality, okay, they have a plan that my secretarial staff, which tends to be on the lower end, they're all buying into the same plan. Does that make sense? We need to develop price points. A great deal of work has to be done on drug plans in state, especially in the tier structure. We have so many plans out there that are 0-10. Okay. The 3-tier plans are not common. And you look at what the effect of that is on the family, on the employer. On a national average, about 78% of your prescriptions should be filled by generic drugs. Okay, my very informal survey tells me that we're far below that. We're at, in some cases, 40 to 30% of people are filling on generic drugs. What's the difference? What's the problem? Okay, the average generic drug in central New York is about $23 a prescription. That same drug on a brand basis is $215. We have to think about, are we pricing ourselves out of affordability of health care, not only from the employer's position, but also from the employee position, by not rethinking some of the ways we do this. The next concept is wellness. In the municipal unions and the municipal environment, wellness is not really thought of very high. We haven't spent a lot of time. There are some studies out there that a good wellness program can reduce premium increases by 7%. Well, if our insurance is going up 12 and there's an opportunity to reduce that, it behooves all the players involved, both the employees and the citizens or the employees, to take a look at that. I'm going to call this the Batavia Plan because they really perhaps have come out without an out-of-the-box thinking that's working. And in that plan, in the Batavia Plan, they have raised, through the collective bargaining process, the group contribution rate, which in New York, and that'll come to a slide, is about 15%. Well, they've raised that up higher, up into the 25s to the 30% brackets. Oh, and you would expect that the unions and the collective bargaining said, how can you possibly do that? But what they've done on that is allowed the individual member, individual employee, the opportunity to bring that down through biometric testing and good health behaviors. Okay? That's a concept that works. It's maybe a concept that I hope it gets real. The next thing to do is that municipalities can do, and this may sound a little why aren't we doing it if you're a school district, because BOCES have done it for years, is the healthcare consortiums. Pool our risk. Okay. Go to bigger groups. Okay. It's very difficult for standalone municipalities to be competitive in the marketplace. Okay. If you are not involved in Medicare retiree drug subsidies, call your broker and ask the question. Use the question, RDS. What does it take to be involved in that? That's money coming back from you if you have retirees on your drug plan. The big opportunity, and I'll go very quickly because I know I'm running out of time here, that we can move perhaps the needle, is to begin to talk about Medicare supplement plans. And that'll be the next slide over if I could. And this is the most informal survey that one will ever find, but I took a look at the people who will still answer my calls in Central New York and say, give me your census data. Okay. And here's what comes out, is that local governments pay about 86% of the premiums and 14% is paying is being paid by employees and retirees. That probably won't shock anybody. We look at our union contracts and probably say, yeah, I'm about there. Okay? However, when you break that down a little bit, okay, when you look at the amount of retirees that municipalities have to cover, okay, about 49% of the municipal government premium is paid for retirees. We're paying big, robust policies on retirees. 51% is active. Okay. When you break it down a little bit further, okay, the employee versus the actives are paying about 61 of their contributions to the employee. What does that mean? We have big, robust policies that we have offered our retirees, but as we all know, these big, robust policies, when a person becomes Medicare eligible, they're secondary. If you have this policy or not, Medicare is going to pay for it. So we have these big policies that are expending a lot of money and driving up a great deal of money for everybody that are not, in fact, being used. Okay? So one of the things that are trying to move, or you may look at, is have a good discussion with your collective bargaining units, have a good discussion with your retirees. Does a Medicare supplement being offered to the retirees, does it make sense? Okay. Is that a way to control Medicare costs through everybody involved so that your house mortgage is not less than your insurance mortgage? For those of us on the table, we know that it's always been very difficult to move retiree health care. Okay? We know that we can get grievances. We know that we can get sued. I'm just going to bring out this case. It was decided last December. It does tend to give us a little bit more power, a little bit more authority to begin to talk about moving retirees' health care plans. You might Google it. It was a very important case. But what it in fact said is that a retiree does not have a vested interest in a specific health plan unless the language of the collective bargaining agreement had these magical words. And that magical words is, the coverage provided shall be the coverage which is in effect for the unit at such time as the employee retires. At such time as the employee retires. That gives us the opportunity to perhaps move retirees into policies that are better for them, because once again, if the price is getting out of reach for active workers, it is certainly getting out of reach for retirees. I just want to close, if I could, with a concept called reverse outsourcing. And it really stems from this more or less, which is universal. And we have to remember that it's also in the private sector. To me, that presents a marketing opportunity. It presents an opportunity that we can sell back to the private sector our municipal skill sets. And we can do that in certain areas that we are very, very good at. We are very, very good at wastewater treatment. We are very, very good at water treatment. We are very, very good in the area of public works. Okay. The concept is, and we put this in place in Cortland with growing success, is that we have made arrangements and deals and with the state's blessing and the state's help. In one case, we are now providing, we operate and own a pretreatment facility inside a manufacturing. A pretreatment side inside a manufacturing. We own it, we operate it, we get paid to do that, we get the amortization of our costs back. And what that allows the employer to do is do what he does well. My employers are very good at doing widgets, but they're not really good at managing wastewater. We're very good at managing wastewater, but I couldn't make a widget if you asked me to. Okay, it allows us to do what we do well and allow manufacturers to do what they do well, and we have some success there because tomorrow morning we will announce that we are bringing up 72 new jobs from Texas to this manufacturing. They're transferring people from the south back to the north. It doesn't happen a lot in my world. What the city does is I am now selling my labor. I have opened up another revenue stream, and as we all know, the revenue streams are closed to us, and it takes a great deal of creativity. So with that, I I'll close my presentation. I hope I didn't rush too fast.
That was great. Thank you, Mac. I think it highlighted the decisions and the discussion that needs to happen at a municipal level. We're right at 2:45. We're hoping that some of you will be able to stay on with us for a few minutes to see if there's some questions. I'll just go through a couple of these slides quickly, and we know that there were a couple of questions that we see that were asked, so I'll ask my presenters here to be looking at that. But certainly next steps from a Cornell perspective is, we encourage you all to check out resources, websites, articles. On our side, we will continue to provide education to the public and to local and state officials. We do some of that through Cornell Cooperative Extension. We know that the School of Industrial and Labor Relations is planning a bargaining pensions in the public sector panel presentation for the fall in New York City. We are seeking resources to continue doing research on shared services, and then we keep in touch with NYSAC, Association of Towns, New York Conference of Mayors, and the schools, and we know they've formed this new Municipal Innovation Exchange for municipalities to share information. So we see ourselves in this for the long haul, and we know that there's some responsibility for you all to stay educated and look at information. I'll keep this, the easy website to go to is just go to CARDI, www.cardi.cornell.edu. On that, you'll see the State of City section. If you just click on the State of City section, you'll find resources, and that's where we will post the PowerPoint presentation and a link to the video recording. So I'm going to see if there's sort of final words from any of our presenters, or if anyone wants to, in particular, respond to this email that Karim posted. But, we'll do kind of a quick wrap-up here. So anyone want to either say some final words or, Karim, I think the answer to your question is there's no easy answer. I mean, that municipalities are going to have to really face some difficult decisions, and we're hoping that as those decisions are made, we still have quality services and places that people will want to come and live in. Mildred, do you want to say any concluding remarks?
I would just answer also the question. The question is the issue of tax-based sharing and development sharing. And on our survey, we found that 60% of municipalities said they were in a competitive relationship with their neighbors for development and property taxes. And only 40% said they were cooperative, and only 2% of those said that they were very cooperative. So we have a competition problem. And hopefully one of the silver linings in this new proposal of requiring shared services might be that we could become more cooperative, because this is an issue. But the problem is that it's very difficult to share tax base and to share revenue sources, and we're all desperate for revenue. And so if you can do what Max suggested, which was identifying new sources of revenue, that's great. If you can identify huge savings in shared services, that's great, but some of the stuff we're doing actually requires new expenditure. And for that, as Clint pointed out, we're looking at commercial development and sales tax as one place to grow the pie. We found that communities that participate in a council of governments, which only 41% of respondents did, but those who do are more likely to participate in shared services agreements. So I guess my hope is that with more conversation and more leadership coming from BOCES and the counties to encourage sharing, we'll talk about this not only in the narrow sense of can we save money, but in the long-term sense of can we rebuild upstate New York as a place with high quality of life, where people want to live, where we do high-quality services, and we're really paying attention, because this is a great place to live. And local governments, as I have shown, have been keeping their expenditures in check. But we have new challenges facing us in the 21st century, and we probably better pull together, not only for our fiscal health, but as Karim in his question raises, for the health of our environment, because with concerns about climate change, we really need to pay attention to sprawl and transportation and those kinds of things.
So we'll hang on for a couple minutes to see if anyone wants to type in a question. Robin, Mac, or Clint, any sort of final words of wisdom, parting shots from your perspective?
I would simply say that being poor should not inhibit your creativity.
And sometimes it forces you to be more creative. Correct?
Yes.
Clint, anything you want to say? So again, this is going to be an issue facing our state for a while. So Cornell is interested in working on education and research and partnering with some of you on the call today. So we want to thank you very much for your time. We apologize for the very beginning, just some snafus. Robin, there's a question for you. What was the source link for the population shift map?
That's from the Census Bureau.
So thank you, everyone, and we'll conclude. And some of you know how to reach Robin or I if you have any follow-up questions that you didn't get to ask, or you may know Mildred. So thank you very much for joining us today. Take care.